At 1:43 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of metal scraping across concrete. At first, I thought it was a trash can rolling in the wind. Then came the low growl of a truck engine, the flash of white headlights across my bedroom wall, and the sharp crack of wood being pulled apart behind my house. I walked to the kitchen window barefoot, half asleep, and looked into my backyard. My fence was coming down, not a broken panel, not a loose post. The entire cedar fence my father had built with his own hands was being taken apart under floodlights. Two men in work gloves were lifting sections of it off the posts, while a pickup truck idled in the alley behind my property. And standing beside them, arms folded like he owned the place, was my next-door neighbor, Rick Delaney. By sunrise, the old fence was gone. In its place stood a new one, crooked, raw, and 6 feet inside my yard. It cut through the lavender bed my mother planted before she got sick. It swallowed the narrow stone walkway to my shed. It boxed in the young maple tree my dad had helped me plant after her funeral. A strip of my backyard, nearly the full length of the lot, had simply been taken overnight. Rick did not knock with an apology. He walked over after breakfast holding a wrinkled photocopy and wearing the kind of smile people wear when they think they have already won. He informed me that my fence had been on his land for years, that his survey proved it, and that I was lucky he had not taken me to court sooner. Then he handed me a typed invoice for $38,000. According to Rick, I owed him for unauthorized land use, delayed patio construction, landscaping damages, contractor fees, emotional distress, and the cost of correcting the boundary. He had moved my fence in the middle of the night, destroyed part of my yard, and still found a way to present himself as the victim. When I told him he had no right to touch my property, he did not raise his voice. He did not have to. He just looked past me at the new fence and said that property lines did not care about family memories. That was the moment I almost lost my temper. Almost. Because while Rick was busy acting like a real estate genius, he had forgotten one small thing. My back porch camera had recorded everything. The trucks, the workers, the old fence being pulled down, the new posts being set into my lawn. Even Rick, standing there in the dark, pointing exactly where he wanted my property line to disappear. So I did not touch the fence. I did not argue with the workers. I did not give Rick the reaction he wanted. I simply looked at the camera above my porch, then at the folder of old property documents still sitting in my father's filing cabinet, and realized Rick had just made the most expensive mistake of his life. My name is Daniel Mercer, and until that fence came down, I was the kind of homeowner most people never noticed. I was 41 years old, a maintenance technician at St. Luke's Regional Hospital, and my life was not exciting in the way people usually tell stories about. I fixed boilers, replaced ceiling tiles, answered emergency calls when pipes burst above patient rooms, and came home tired enough to appreciate silence. I did not host loud parties. I did not chase neighborhood drama. I paid my HOA dues on time, mowed my lawn every Saturday morning, and waved at people even when they pretended not to see me. That house was not a luxury property. It was a single-story, pale blue ranch on a quiet street in Willow Creek Estates, with a cracked driveway, a small front porch, and a backyard that meant more to me than any square footage number on a listing sheet ever could. My parents bought it when I was in high school. My mother, Elise, planted lavender along the back fence because she said the smell made the yard feel peaceful after long days. My father, Martin, built the cedar fence 12 years before Rick ever moved in. He did not guess where it belonged. He hired a licensed surveyor, waited for the property pins to be marked, saved the receipt, saved the survey, and even took photographs of the orange flags before the first post went into the ground. That was the kind of man my father was. Careful, quiet, exact. After my mother passed, the backyard became the one place where the house still felt like her. The lavender came back every spring. The hydrangeas leaned toward the afternoon sun. The little maple tree near the corner of the lot had been planted the weekend after her funeral. when neither my father nor I knew what to say to each other, so we dug a hole instead. Years later, when my father's memory started slipping and he moved into assisted living, I bought out what remained of the mortgage and kept the house. I was not trying to make an investment play. I was trying to hold on to the last place where my family had been whole. Willow Creek Estates had an HOA, but for a long time it was mostly harmless. They cared about mailbox colors, trash cans left out too long, and whether sheds matched the house. Annoying sometimes, but manageable. I learned the rules, followed them, and kept to myself. Then Rick Delaney bought the house next door. Rick arrived with 2 moving trucks, a black SUV, and the kind of confidence that made every conversation feel like a negotiation. He told people he was a real estate investor. He liked to mention closings, margins, contractors, and market timing in casual conversations that nobody had asked for. Within 6 months, he had joined the HOA Architectural Committee. Within 9 months, he was walking around the neighborhood with a clipboard, measuring fence heights and taking pictures of driveways. At first, I tried to be patient with him. Rick complained that my shed was too close to the fence, even though I had HOA approval in writing. He said my maple tree would eventually drop leaves into his future patio area. He hinted that my backyard looked outdated and that property values depended on everyone making sacrifices for the appearance of the community. I smiled through most of it because I had a sick father to visit, hospital shifts to cover, and no interest in fighting a man who seemed to feed on conflict. But looking back, that was exactly what Rick counted on. He mistook quiet for weak. He mistook politeness for permission. And he mistook my attachment to that yard for sentiment he could bulldoze with a photocopied document and a number big enough to scare me. For anyone listening who has ever had a neighbor, an HOA board, or a contractor act like your property rights disappear just because they speak louder, you already understand the feeling. It is not just anger. It is the sick, cold realization that someone looked at your home, your memories, and your boundaries, and decided they could take a piece of them if they moved fast enough. Before that night, I thought Rick was just another difficult neighbor with too much money and too little humility. After I saw my father's fence lying in pieces under his floodlights, I understood something different. Rick was not being careless. He was testing how much of my life he could take before I finally pushed back. By 8 that morning, Rick had turned what he did in the dark into an official accusation. The first email arrived while I was still standing in my backyard, staring at the raw line where my old fence used to be. It came from Rick, copied to the HOA president, the architectural committee, and 3 board members I had barely spoken to in years. The subject line made my stomach tighten before I even opened it. It called the matter an unauthorized occupation of private land. Rick's message was written like a legal document, but it had the smugness of a man who wanted an audience. He claimed that my family had knowingly maintained a fence on his property for over a decade. He claimed that the lavender beds, the maple tree, and the stone walkway were all evidence of my continued use of land that never belonged to me. He said he had finally corrected the boundary because I had benefited long enough from what he called my father's mistake. Attached to the email was the same blurry photocopy he had waved at me in the yard, along with a typed invoice for $38,000. He broke it down as if numbers made the lie more believable. $12,000 for delayed landscaping, $8,500 for contractor standby fees, $6,000 for loss of use, $7,000 for removing and rebuilding the fence. The rest was listed under legal consultation, stress, and damages to his future patio plan. I read the invoice 3 times, not because it made sense, but because I could not believe someone had the nerve to charge me for stealing my own backyard. Then the HOA notice came in. Marcia Bell, the HOA president, wrote that the board had received information suggesting my fence was improperly placed and that I was not to interfere with the corrected boundary fencing until the matter could be reviewed. She reminded me that hostile behavior toward neighbors or contractors could result in additional fines. She did not ask for my survey. She did not ask whether I had approved the work. She did not ask why a fence had been moved in the middle of the night. She simply treated Rick's version as if it had already become fact. That afternoon, Rick made sure the whole street knew about it. I was carrying a damaged fence board toward my garage when he stepped onto his driveway with his phone in his hand, speaking loudly enough for two passing neighbors to hear. He said there was finally accountability in the neighborhood. He said some people had been taking land that was not theirs for years and acting innocent, because no one had the backbone to challenge them. He never used my name, but he looked directly at me every time he said it. A few hours later, a small crew came back. This time they were not just finishing the fence. They were spreading gravel over the strip of yard Rick had taken. They rolled a wheelbarrow straight across my grass, dumped pale gray stone over the soil where my mother's lavender had been, and drove wooden stakes into the ground near the maple tree. One of the stakes had orange ribbon tied around the top, marking the corner of what looked like a future patio. I walked outside and told them to stop until the property line was confirmed. The foreman barely looked at me. He said Rick had provided the documents and that any dispute was between me and the owner. The owner. That word hit harder than I expected, because he was saying it while standing on the same dirt where my father had once knelt with a level and a post hole digger. Rick came out a minute later, calm as ever. He told the crew to keep working and said I was creating a disturbance. He reminded me that he had already informed the HOA. He said if I touched the new fence, moved a stake, or interfered with the workers, he would call the sheriff and report vandalism. Then he mentioned the $38,000 again, this time adding that the number could climb if I forced him to involve his attorney. The worst part was not even the money. It was the way he looked at my yard like it had never belonged to anyone who loved it. He pointed toward the maple and said the tree was in the way of his design anyway. He said my sentimental attachment to old landscaping did not change property law. He said property lines did not care about family memories. That was when I felt something in me go still. Not calm exactly, more like the silence that happens right before a storm breaks. I wanted to rip every new post out of the ground. I wanted to drag the gravel back onto his driveway and make him look me in the eye while I did it. I wanted everyone on that street to understand that my father had not made a mistake, that my mother's garden was not trespassing, and that Rick Delaney did not get to rewrite my family history with a cheap photocopy and a midnight work crew. But I did none of that, because men like Rick know how to use anger. They provoke it, record it, label it as instability, and hand it to people like Marcia Bell as proof that they were the reasonable one all along. So I stepped back. I took photos of the gravel. I took photos of the stakes. I took photos of the cut roots around the maple tree and the exposed dirt where the lavender had been scraped away. I saved Rick's email, the HOA notice, and the invoice. I wrote down the license plate of the contractor's truck. I stood in my own backyard, watching strangers build a lie on top of my soil, and forced myself not to give them a single careless moment they could use against me. That night, after the crew left and Rick's floodlights finally went dark, I went into the hall closet and pulled out my father's old filing box. It smelled like paper, dust, and the cedar blocks he used to keep moths away. Inside were tax records, warranty manuals, insurance papers, and a thick folder labeled property documents in his careful block handwriting. I opened it on the kitchen table. There was the deed. There was the plat map. There were the photographs of the orange survey flags from 12 years earlier. And beneath them, protected in a plastic sleeve, was the original stamped survey my father had paid for before the fence ever went up. Rick thought he had picked on a quiet man with no fight in him. What he had really done was wake up every piece of proof my father had been careful enough to leave behind. The next morning, I treated my own backyard like a crime scene. I did not move the gravel. I did not touch the new fence. I did not pull out the stakes Rick had driven into my soil, even though every one of them made my chest tighten when I looked at it. Instead, I made coffee, cleared my kitchen table, and started building the one thing Rick had not expected from me: a paper trail. The first thing I did was download the security footage from my back porch camera. I had installed it 2 years earlier after someone stole packages from 3 houses on our street, and until that night, the most exciting thing it had ever recorded was a raccoon knocking over my recycling bin. But now, frame by frame, it showed Rick's truck backing into the alley at 1:17 in the morning. It showed 2 workers unloading tools. It showed them carrying sections of my old cedar fence away like they were removing junk from an abandoned lot. Then I checked the side camera above my garage. That one had audio. It was not perfect, but it was clear enough. Rick could be seen standing near the corner post, pointing into my yard, guiding the crew where to set the new line. He was not confused. He was not relying on a contractor's mistake. He was directing the whole thing, calmly and deliberately, while my house was dark and I was asleep inside. I saved every clip in 3 places: my laptop, an external drive, and a cloud folder. Then I took screenshots with timestamps. I labeled each file by date, time, and camera angle because I did not want to be the emotional homeowner waving a phone around. I wanted everything organized enough that a stranger could understand it without me saying a word. After that, I photographed the yard from every angle: the new fence posts, the missing cedar panels, the gravel spread over my mother's lavender bed, the cut roots near the maple tree, the wheelbarrow tracks pressed into the grass, the orange stakes marking Rick's future patio. I placed a tape measure on the ground and photographed the distance from the new fence to the old post holes because the old holes were still visible in the dirt, like a ghost line of where my boundary had been. Then I went back inside and opened my father's folder. The original survey was stamped, signed, and dated. It had the lot number, subdivision name, property dimensions, easements, setbacks, and iron pin locations. My father had kept the invoice from the surveyor, the fence contractor's receipt, the HOA approval letter from 12 years earlier, and photographs of the old orange flags before the fence was installed. He had even written notes in pencil on the back of one photo, marking which corner was closest to the alley. For the first time since he moved into assisted living, I felt like he was still protecting the house. Rick had counted on confusion. My father had left clarity. I scanned every page and made digital copies. Then I logged into the county property records site and searched both addresses, mine and Rick's. I downloaded the recorded plat map for Willow Creek Estates, my deed, and Rick's deed. I compared the lot numbers against the blurry paper Rick had sent me. Something already looked wrong. The shape of the lot on Rick's photocopy did not quite match either of our properties. But I did not trust myself to make that call yet. So I called the county clerk's office. I kept my voice calm and explained that my neighbor had moved a fence overnight and was claiming a survey gave him rights to a strip of my backyard. The clerk could not give legal advice, but she told me where to find recorded surveys and confirmed that any official survey used in a boundary dispute should have a surveyor's seal, signature, date, and identifying information that matched the parcel. Rick's photocopy had none of that. It was just a faded diagram with measurements and a cropped corner where the title should have been. Next, I checked the county permit portal. There was no permit for a fence replacement at Rick's address, no permit for grading, no permit for patio construction, no permit for any retaining wall or drainage work, even though the crew had already started changing the surface of the land near the back easement. When I searched my own address, the old fence approval from the HOA did not show on the county site because it had not required a building permit back then, but I had the HOA letter in my father's file. That mattered because it showed the fence had never been hidden, disputed, or secretly installed. Then I read the HOA bylaws from start to finish. I had never done that before. Like most people, I had only looked up sections when I needed them. But that morning I read every page with a highlighter in my hand. The HOA could regulate fence height, color, materials, and exterior appearance. It could fine homeowners for unapproved modifications. It could require applications before construction, but it could not determine legal ownership of land. There was a paragraph buried under architectural disputes that said boundary conflicts between owners had to be resolved by recorded survey, court order, or written agreement between the property owners. The board could not enforce a private boundary claim based only on one homeowner's statement. That meant Marcia's notice was not just premature, it was outside the HOA's own rules. I printed that page and put it on top of the folder. By noon, I had a timeline. Rick had threatened me with a photocopy. The HOA had repeated his claim without checking it. The contractor had moved a fence at night with no permit. My cameras had recorded the work. My father's documents showed the original fence had been placed after a proper survey. The county records raised questions about Rick's paper, and the HOA bylaws showed the board had no authority to treat his version as fact. But I still needed the one thing that would end the argument completely: a licensed surveyor. I called 3 companies before I found Angela Ruiz. Her website said she had worked boundary disputes, easement conflicts, and residential encroachment cases for more than 20 years. When I described what happened, she did not sound shocked in the way I expected. She sounded tired, like she had heard too many versions of the same story. She told me not to move anything. Not the stakes, not the gravel, not the fence, not even the broken roots if I could avoid it. She wanted the scene exactly as Rick had left it. She asked me to send the deed, the old survey, the plat map, the HOA notice, and the photos. I sent everything within 15 minutes. That evening, Rick emailed again. This time he copied the same HOA members and wrote that my silence would be treated as refusal to cooperate. He warned that his contractor was scheduled to continue work and that any delay caused by me would increase the damages. He attached the $38,000 invoice again, as if repetition could turn it into truth. I did not respond with anger. I wrote one short email. I denied his claim. I stated that I did not consent to the removal of my fence or the occupation of my yard. I asked that all work stop until the boundary could be verified by a licensed surveyor. I asked that all future communication be in writing. Then I copied the HOA board and saved the email as a PDF before I sent it. Rick had built his plan around pressure, fast work, loud accusations, a big number, and an HOA president willing to treat his confidence as proof. I built mine around records. 2 days later, Angela arrived in a white truck with survey equipment in the back and yellow paint marks on her boots. She walked the alley first, then the rear corners, then the line where my old fence had stood. She found one iron pin near the back corner, almost buried under leaves. She found another near the side yard, just inches from where my father's photograph had shown an orange flag 12 years earlier. The longer she worked, the quieter she became. She checked the new fence, checked her equipment, checked the plat map, and walked the line again. Rick watched from his patio door with his arms crossed, but he did not come outside. When Angela finally lowered the receiver and looked at the new fence, her expression told me the situation was not what Rick had promised everyone. It was worse. And for the first time since I saw my father's cedar boards being carried away in the dark, I felt the ground shift under Rick instead of under me. Angela did not give me an answer in the yard that day. She was careful, and that made me trust her more. She told me she needed to verify the field measurements against the recorded plat, the deed descriptions, and the original survey my father had kept. She took photographs of the iron pins, the new fence posts, the old post holes, and the disturbed soil where the lavender bed had been scraped away. Then she packed up her equipment and told me not to let anyone pressure me into signing anything before her report was finished. Rick sent another email that night. This one sounded less patient. He wrote that my surveyor was a delay tactic, that the corrected fence line was already established, and that his damages were increasing by the day. He also claimed the HOA had verbally agreed that he was within his rights to continue work. I did not answer him. By then, I had learned something important. Rick wanted noise. He wanted a fight in the driveway, a shouting match in front of neighbors, an angry message he could forward to the board. Silence made him uncomfortable, because silence meant I was not playing the role he had written for me. 3 days later, Angela's report arrived in my inbox. I opened the PDF at my kitchen table with my father's old folder beside me. The first page had her seal, signature, license number, parcel information, and the legal description of my lot. It looked nothing like Rick's blurry photocopy. It was clean, measured, and official. The conclusion was devastating. The original cedar fence my father built had been almost exactly where it was supposed to be. In one small section, it was less than 3 inches inside the margin of the line, which Angela explained was not unusual for a residential fence, and did not place it on Rick's property. It had never stolen his land. It had never blocked his legal use. It had never created the grand violation he had described to the HOA. The new fence was the real problem. Rick's crew had moved the boundary between 5 feet 8 inches and 6 feet 4 inches into my yard, across the rear portion of the lot. That meant the gravel, the stakes, the damaged roots, and the new patio layout were all sitting on land recorded under my deed. The strip he had accused me of occupying was not his at all. He had taken mine. But Angela's report did not stop there. She included a copy of the document Rick had sent me and compared it with the county plat records. The paper he called a survey was not a survey. It was an old landscaping site sketch from another property in Willow Creek Estates. It had no surveyor seal, no signature, no recording number, and no legal authority. The lot shape did not match mine or Rick's. The measurements were close enough to confuse someone at a glance, but wrong enough that any professional would catch it immediately. The most important part was what Rick had cropped out. Angela found the original version of the sketch in a permit archive for a different address 2 streets away. The title block, which Rick's photocopy was missing, showed a different lot number entirely. Someone had cut off the identifying information before sending it to me and the HOA. I sat there staring at that page for a long time. Rick had not simply misunderstood a property line. He had used a document that did not belong to either of us, stripped away the part that proved it, and then demanded $38,000 as if I was the one committing fraud against him. Then came the second twist. The strip of land Rick had invaded contained a recorded utility easement running along the rear of my property. It did not give Rick the right to use it. It did not let him build a patio over it. It existed for utility access, drainage maintenance, and county-approved service work. By driving stakes, spreading gravel, and preparing to build inside that zone, Rick had created a separate code problem that had nothing to do with me. Angela marked the easement clearly in red. She also noted that the new fence placement could obstruct access, and that any permanent patio or retaining structure in that area would likely require county review. In plain English, Rick had not just stolen part of my yard. He had stepped into a restricted area while trying to make it look like I was the violator. I sent the report to Caleb Morris, a real estate attorney recommended by a coworker whose family had dealt with an easement dispute years earlier. I expected Caleb to tell me it was a simple boundary issue. He did not. After reviewing the emails, the invoice, the HOA notice, the camera footage, and Angela's survey, Caleb said Rick's problem was much bigger than a misplaced fence. There was trespass, there was property damage, there was the unauthorized removal of a fence, there was interference with a recorded easement, and there was the question of whether Rick had knowingly used a false or misleading document to pressure me into paying him. Caleb prepared a demand letter that was cold enough to make even me nervous. It required Rick to remove the new fence, restore the original fence line under surveyor supervision, stop all construction inside the disputed area, preserve all communications with the contractor and HOA, withdraw the $38,000 demand, pay for Angela's survey, pay for the damaged landscaping, and reimburse my legal fees. It also warned that if he continued work or repeated the false claims, The matter would be escalated to county code enforcement, the utility company, and civil court. For the first time, I understood why my father had saved every document. He had not been paranoid. He had been protecting the future from exactly this kind of person, the kind who believes a confident lie can beat a quiet truth. But I did not send the letter immediately. Rick had already scheduled himself to speak at the next HOA meeting. Marcia had placed the fence dispute on the agenda, and the wording made it clear they expected me to defend myself like a guilty man asking for mercy. Rick wanted an audience. He wanted neighbors watching while he called my family trespassers and waved his fake paper around like a court order. So I printed Angela's survey in color. I printed the county plat. I printed the easement page. I printed the cropped document beside the original version from the other property. I placed Caleb's demand letter on top. Then I put everything in a clean folder and waited. Rick thought the meeting would be where he embarrassed me into paying him. He did not understand that it was about to become the place where his $38,000 lie fell apart in front of everyone. The HOA meeting took place on a Thursday night in the Willow Creek Clubhouse, in a room that usually smelled like coffee, floor cleaner, and old carpet. By the time I arrived, Rick was already there. He stood near the front with Marcia Bell, the HOA president, speaking quietly but looking pleased with himself. He had a folder under one arm, and that same relaxed posture he always used when he wanted everyone to believe the outcome had already been decided. A few neighbors glanced at me as I walked in. Some looked curious, some looked uncomfortable. One woman from 2 houses down gave me a small, sympathetic nod, then quickly looked away. I took a seat near the aisle and kept my folder closed on my lap. When Marcia reached the fence dispute on the agenda, she described it as a boundary correction between 2 homeowners. That phrase alone told me how far Rick's story had traveled. Boundary correction. As if waking up to men dismantling my father's fence at 1 a.m. was just a paperwork adjustment. Rick stood first. He spoke smoothly. He said he had tried to be patient. He said my family's fence had been improperly placed for years. He said he had absorbed losses, delayed improvements, and finally taken responsible action after confirming the line. Then he turned slightly toward me and said no community could function if one homeowner refused to respect property rights. That was the part that almost made me laugh, but I did not interrupt him. When Marcia asked if I had anything to say, I stood up, walked to the front table, and placed Angela's stamped survey in front of the board. Then I placed the county plat map beside it. Then the easement page. Then the printout from the county permit portal showing no active permits for Rick's fence relocation, grading, patio, or retaining work. Finally, I placed Caleb Morris's demand letter on top. The room got quiet. I explained that the HOA did not have authority to determine property ownership based on a photocopy. I explained that the original fence had been placed after a licensed survey and that the new fence was now sitting more than 5 feet inside my recorded property line. I explained that Rick's document was not a survey at all, but a cropped landscaping sketch from a different lot in the subdivision. Rick's face changed when I said cropped. Marcia tried to step in, saying the board was not a court of law. I agreed with her. Then I pointed to the bylaws and said that was exactly why the board should never have treated Rick's claim as valid without a recorded survey or court order. One board member asked whether I had proof the fence had been moved at night. I opened my laptop. I played only 30 seconds of the porch camera footage. It was enough. Rick's truck came into view. The workers unloaded tools. The old cedar panels came down. Then the side camera audio played, faint but clear, with Rick's voice telling the crew to put the new line farther in because I would not fight it. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The next morning, code enforcement arrived at my house. Angela was there too, along with a county inspector and a sheriff's deputy who had been asked to keep the peace while they checked the site. Rick came outside in a polo shirt and sunglasses, acting annoyed at first, like the entire county government had interrupted his schedule. But that attitude faded when the inspector compared the fence to Angela's markers. The inspector confirmed the encroachment. He confirmed the fence interfered with the recorded utility easement. He confirmed that the gravel and stakes were part of unpermitted work. Then he asked Rick for his permit records. Rick did not have them. He tried blaming the contractor. The contractor, who had been called back to the site, immediately said Rick had provided the layout and insisted the work be done before sunrise to avoid neighborhood drama. He said those exact words in front of the inspector, the deputy, Angela, and me. For the first time since the whole thing began, Rick looked small. Not sorry, just trapped. The utility company sent its own notice later that week, warning that nothing permanent could be placed in that easement without approval. Caleb sent a formal letter to the HOA, reminding them that they had exposed themselves by supporting a private boundary claim without verifying the legal documents. Marcia withdrew the notice against me the same afternoon. The threatened fines disappeared from my account without apology. By then, the dispute was no longer Rick's word against mine. It was a survey, a county file, a permit violation, a video record, a contractor statement, an easement notice, a legal demand. Rick had built his entire threat on confidence, pressure, and the hope that I would be too scared to check the facts. But once the people with clipboards, badges, stamps, and legal letterhead arrived, his confidence stopped mattering. Rick had to remove the fence under county supervision. Not someday, not when it was convenient. The notice gave him a deadline, and every day after that came with the possibility of fines. The same contractor who had moved my fence in the dark came back in broad daylight, this time with Angela's survey markers in the ground and a county inspector watching from the alley. There was no swagger left in it. The gravel was shoveled out of my yard, the patio stakes were pulled, the damaged soil was replaced. The new fence posts were removed from my side of the line, and a replacement cedar fence went back where my father's original fence had stood. Rick had to pay for the survey, the fence restoration, the cleanup, the landscaping repair, and a new maple tree after an arborist confirmed the old one had been too badly damaged at the roots to survive. Through Caleb, we reached a settlement before it went to court. Rick paid my attorney fees, reimbursed the cost of Angela's report, covered the tree and garden damage, and signed an agreement admitting he had no claim to that strip of land. He also withdrew the $38,000 demand in writing. That number followed him after that. At the next HOA meeting, one of the older homeowners asked whether the board planned to verify documents before helping someone invent a $38,000 land grab again. Nobody laughed loudly, but the room shifted in that quiet way rooms do when everyone is thinking the same thing. Marcia Bell stepped down as HOA president 2 weeks later. The architectural committee changed its procedures. From that point on, any dispute involving a property line required a recorded survey, not a board member's confidence, not a neighbor's accusation, and definitely not a cropped photocopy from some other lot. Rick lost his committee seat. He stopped walking around with his clipboard. He still lived next door, but he no longer looked at my yard like it was something waiting to be taken. As for me, I planted the new maple on a cool Saturday morning. I placed it a few feet from where the old one had stood, close enough to feel connected, far enough to give the roots a fresh start. Then I put my father's survey, Angela's report, the settlement agreement, and every photo into a waterproof folder and locked it in my safe. I did not win because I shouted louder than Rick. I won because I stayed calm when he wanted me angry. I kept records when he counted on confusion. I checked the deed, the survey, the easement, the permits, and the HOA rules before I made a move. A property line may look like a simple mark on paper, but sometimes it is the line between peace and someone else's arrogance. And when a person tries to erase that line, the strongest thing you can do is not lose control. It is to prove exactly where the line has always been. If you have ever dealt with an HOA, a neighbor, or a contractor who tried to bully you with fake authority, leave your thoughts in the comments. Share this story with someone who might need the reminder. Save it, in case you ever face a property dispute of your own. And subscribe for more stories where the truth does not have to be loud to win.